Now, last lecture we were talking about the nature of the Delhi Sultanate from a religious perspective, whether it was a theocracy or should it be considered a secular state. So, end में conclusion ये निकला था that it was neither a theocracy nor could it qualify as a secular state. Why not a theocracy? Because it did not fulfill certain criteria, such as having a sovereign and hereditary ulema class and the Shariat being the having primacy in the legal machine. ये दोनों conditions fulfill नहीं होते थे. Secondly, it was not a secular state because there was a distinct religious bias. The state even perceived itself as the prophet of Islam in India. That its objective, grand objective, was to transform India from Darul Harb into Darul Islam. So it was neither. हाँ क्या actually? It was a religious political institution which was simply using the religious ideology in order to fulfill its political objectives. Okay? Now, associated with the question of religion emerges another question. Take down this question. How far was the Caliphate the source of power and sanction of the legal authority of the Sultan in the Delhi Sultanate. This question was asked in your mains examination in 2017. So how far was the Caliphate the source of power and sanction of the legal authority of the Sultan in the Delhi Sultanate? Now, why does this question emerge? Because almost all the sultans maintained close relations with the Caliph. Almost all of them styled themselves as the deputy of the Caliph. The Caliph was honored with the ornaments of sovereignty, such as the recitation of his name was done in the khutbah portion of the Friday prayers. So his name was included in the khutbah. Similarly, the Caliph's name was also inscribed, generally inscribed on coins. The sultans publicly proclaimed the supremacy of the Caliph. Right? They frequently exchanged embassies and gifts with the Caliph. And this was not done only by the weaker sultans such as Firoz Shah Tughlaq, but even by the strongest sultans such as Alauddin Khilji Balban and Muhammad bin Tughlaq. And therefore, in the traditional historiography of this period, a notion emerged that the Caliph had an immense influence in the inner workings of the Sultanate, right? That the Sultan was receiving his power and sanction from the Caliph. Had the Caliph not recognized the Sultan would have remained illegitimate and would easily be challenged by various competitors, right? And this notion of the importance of the Caliph is also embedded in Islamic history, right? Now, Islam is not only a religion but also a political philosophy with its own theory of state. Under Islam, the entire Islamic community spread across the world is considered to be a single nation. Known as the Ummah, right? With a singular religious and political leader known as the Caliph. Okay? Now, this theory remained in practice till the early 10th century. However, in the 10th century, the situation began to shift. The Abbasid Caliphate was the name of the state. Abbas was the name of the dynasty. So Abbas dynasty Caliphate tha. The Abbasid Caliphate began to disintegrate. Right? At the height of its power, the Caliphate stretched from Spain and Western Africa right up to Afghanistan and Punjab and Sindh. Right? Now, once that began disintegrating, The ambitious governors especially in the peripheral regions, in the far-flung regions, what did they want? Lesser independence or greater independence? Greater independence. They desired greater autonomy. Now, this not only threatened the political and territorial integrity of the Caliphate, but since the Caliphate was at the very center of the Islamic political theory, it also threatened the survival of Islam firstly its political theory, and since one of the pillars supporting the superstructure of Islam has crumbled, it would also threaten the religion itself. Okay? Therefore, in the eyes of the Islamic intellectuals and the rulers, the disintegration of the Abbasid Caliphate was nothing short of a grave crisis. Okay? In order to overcome this crisis, a compromise was struck. As per the terms of this compromise, the ambitious governors were given the title of Sultan. That means sovereign ruler. The word Sultan comes from the Arabic word Sult, which literally means power. They were given almost complete autonomy in all matters. Be it the internal policy or external policy. However, in return, the Sultan would have to recognize the Caliph as his superior. Okay? Therefore, a practice emerged in the Islamic world of granting Mansur by the caliphs to the various sultans. Once a new sultan and a new sultanate emerged in any part of the world, it became a normal practice for the sultan to apply for the recognition of the caliph, right? And the caliph would proclaim them to be the rightful ruler of a particular region through a Mansur, which was a legal document. It was a letter of investiture. Recognizing the particular sultan as the legitimate ruler. Following this, the sultan could legally describe himself as the right hand of the caliph, as the deputy of the caliph. In India, the sultans generally adopted the title of Mominul Khalifa. Sorry, I'm forgetting the exact title, but yeah, it literally means the deputy of the caliph, right? So they could now adopt the title, right? What was the result of this compromise? That the sultans were able to realize their ambitions, but at the same time, at least theoretically, the unity of the Islamic world was preserved, right? So this was the compromise. And if you look at Islamic history in this way, would it be correct to say that the fortunes of the sultans of Delhi were made or broken by the acceptance of the Khalifa or his rejection of their legitimacy? नहीं, तो उसका कोई real फर्क पड़ेगा, real influence होगा, that if the caliph accepts a particular sultan, so will there be any practical use for this? Suppose that me and let us say Alauddin Khilji are locked in a struggle for the throne. I have received the recognition of the caliph, Alauddin Khilji has not. Is he going to stop because I have been declared as the rightful ruler of Delhi by the caliph? रुकेगा वो? नहीं रुकेगा, right? So in reality, the recognition of the caliph had no practical effect on the fortunes of a sultan. So no sultan of Delhi was ever appointed, was ever elevated to the position of sultan simply because he was recognized by the caliph. Similarly, no sultan was removed from power simply because the caliph did not recognize his legitimacy, right? Secondly, granting, or you can write applying for, and granting the Mansur was a common practice in that period. So almost all the sultans which emerged by rule applied for the recognition of the caliph, and caliph ने कभी किसी को मना किया? नहीं मना किया. So the caliph also always granted the recognition. Now let us look at the different sultans of Delhi. Iltutmish, after consolidating power in Delhi, one of the first tasks he did was to apply for the recognition of the Caliph. He received the Mansur and adopted the title of Amin ul Momin ul Khalifa. He had the name of the contemporary caliph included in the khutbah and also inscribed on his coins, sikka, right? But Iltutmish was also facing a number of other sultans, right? Such as Tajuddin Yildiz, Nasiruddin Kubacha, and Iwas Shah. Tajuddin Yildiz in Ghur, Nasiruddin Kubacha in Sindh, Iwas Shah in Bengal. All of them had also adopted the title of Sultan. All of them had also received the Mansur, and all of them had adopted the title of Amin ul Mominul Khalifa. Right? Did this stop Iltutmish from eliminating his rivals? Iltutmish इसकी वजह से रुक गया क्योंकि इन लोगों को कैलिफ ने रिकॉग्नाइज कर लिया है? नहीं. तो Iltutmish ignored the recognition of the caliph and eliminated his rivals. Now, what was he doing effectively? He was effectively violated the principle of the caliph's supremacy. ठीक है? So theoretically, principle of caliph supremacy was in place, and all these rulers were his legal deputies. In violation of the caliph's authority, he removed all his legal deputies and established his total control over the entire sultanate. Right? तो अब ये बताओ, ये जो principle of caliph supremacy था, was that a real principle or was it only in the imagination? Only in the imagination. इसका कोई real effect था नहीं. Secondly, how have the historians and scholars of that age viewed these acts of Iltutmish? Has Iltutmish been criticized for violating the authority of the caliph, or has he been glorified for consolidating the sultanate? क्या हुआ है? उस समय के जो इंटेलेक्चुअल्स थे कैसे देखते थे इन एक्टिविटीज को? As a positive development or a negative development? As a positive development. So contemporary scholars such as Barni, Siraj, Afif, Isami have praised Iltutmish. ठीक है? So while praising Iltutmish, what have they done inadvertently? They have also challenged the principle of caliph supremacy. ठीक है? So neither for the rulers nor for the intellectuals of that period, many of whom came from a religious background, was the principle of caliph supremacy real. ठीक है? बाकी सुल्तान देख लीजिए. बलबन and Alauddin Khilji. Balban, a strong ruler, introduced a new theory of kingship in which he claimed to have divine rights and a divine origin. Did he require the sanction of the caliph? No, because he was seeking his legitimacy elsewhere. So he did not require the caliph's sanction to legitimize his reign. Alauddin Khilji, again a strong ruler, came up with a new theory of kingship and a new source of legitimacy. Kya? The principle of strength. I am king because I am the strongest. Did he require the sanction of the caliph, recognition of the caliph to legitimize his rule? Not in reality. But both of them applied for and received the investiture of the caliph. Both of them described themselves as the right hand of the caliph. Okay? And this was simply a political move. ठीक है? अब इससे कोई फायदा तो नहीं हो रहा है, लेकिन कोई नुकसान भी नहीं हो रहा है. The caliph has no real authority over the Sultan of Delhi, so there is no harm in recognizing the authority of the caliph and styling oneself as the legal deputy of the caliph in the empire. एक marginal फायदा हो सकता है that in the eyes of a few orthodox Islamic elements, even the strongest rulers, most despotic rulers may appear to be legitimate. ठीक है? So it was simply a political move in order to broaden the social base of the empire, to gain legitimacy among the orthodox section of Muslims in India. Clear hai? That is it. This is also reflected in the policy of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. What kind of a religious policy did Muhammad bin Tughlaq adopt? A secular and plural religious policy. His political philosophy was characterized by the principle of royal absolutism, and he wanted to de-link the Sultanate in India from the Islamic theory of a unified Islamic empire. Therefore, initially, he did not seek the caliph's recognition. ठीक है? And it was only after revolts and rebellions had broken out against him that he sought the caliph's recognition. So, only after numerous revolts did he apply for the caliph's recognition, which the caliph was more than happy to give to him. Now, in both these cases, what do you think was the primary concern? The fulfillment of his political objectives. So, practical politics always took precedence in the minds of the Sultan over the religious agenda. Okay? So, once again, in both these cases, it was a political move. Mubarak Shah Khilji, also known as Qutub Mubarak Khilji, he was one of the sons of Alauddin Khilji and became Sultan after Alauddin's death. So, Alauddin के death के बाद there was a brief disruption. Malik Kafur का नाम सुना है ना? That was his general. He was extremely ambitious and he had placed one of the minor sons of Alauddin Khilji on the throne, who he had made his puppet, and he was the real power behind the throne. So for a few months, Malik Kafur's sultanate was in place. Mubarak Shah Khilji was supported by some of the other nobles and military generals who were jealous of Malik Kafur and his undue influence at Delhi. And therefore, they plotted against Kafur and had him executed. Mubarak Shah Khilji became the new ruler. Now, he was the descendant of Alauddin Khilji. He wanted to take the principle of royal supremacy one step further. So, इसने क्या किया? He did not apply for the Mansur, and in fact, declared himself as the caliph. ठीक है, तो अपने आप को ही इसने खलीफा डिक्लेयर कर दिया. Did the caliph send a huge army to topple him? फौज भेजी इसको हराने के लिए खलीफा ने बगदाद से? नहीं भेज सकता था, राइट? So this had no practical ramifications. And once again, this shows that the principle of the caliph's supremacy was simply a mirage. It was not real. In contrast, consider the case of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. How is he remembered in history, as a strong or weak sultan? Weak sultan. who did he depend upon to support him in the troubled times that the Sultanate was going through? He depended entirely upon the support of the nobility and the ulema. Right? Now, the nobility and the ulema had both suffered under the reign of his predecessor Muhammad bin Tughlaq, who in their eyes had discriminated against them and favored Hindu nobles. Right? तो अब फिरोज शाह तुगलक को किस तरह का रिलीजियस पॉलिसी अडॉप्ट करना पड़ेगा इन लोगों को अपीज करने के लिए? एन ऑर्थोडॉक्स रिलीजियस पॉलिसी. And by following this orthodox religious policy, it was Firoz Shah Tughlaq's intention to at least appear to be an ideal Muslim king. ठीक है? And अगर आइडियल मुस्लिम किंग अपने आप को दिखाना है तो would he require the sanction of the caliph or not? Would he require the recognition of the caliph or not? चाहिए होगा. Therefore, he applied for the caliph's investiture and received it not only once but on two separate occasions. Received it twice. ठीक है? तो पहली बार खलीफा ने रिकग्नाइज कर लिया, इसको यकीन नहीं हुआ, इसने दोबारा अप्लाई कर दिया कि कहीं कोई गलती तो नहीं हो गई है. राइट? तो दैट मजाक है, बट द आइडिया इज दैट फिरोज शाह तुगलक was trying to maintain a friendly relation with the caliph and having his authority recognized by the caliph twice because he was following an orthodox religious policy. Right? So once again, was this a result of the caliph's practical authority in Delhi, or was it a result of the political compulsions of the Sultan? Political compulsions of the Sultan. Even in the case of Firoz Shah Tughlaq, it was a political move. The principle of the supremacy of the Caliphate was used by Firoz Shah Tughlaq in order to fulfill his political objectives. Okay? Now coming back to this question, how far was the Caliphate the source of power and sanction of the legal authority of the Sultan in the Delhi Sultanate? What is going to be our analysis? Answer क्या होगा? कि कोई practical significance नहीं, right? That the Caliphate exercised no real authority over the Sultan. In fact, the emergence of the institution of Sultan was the result of a compromise which was brought about by the decline of the Caliph's practical authority. It was made in order to preserve the theoretical unity of the Islamic Empire and the strength of the Islamic faith. It was used by the Caliph in order to retain at least the ornaments of sovereignty in the Islamic world, and it was used by the sultans to gain legitimacy in the eyes of their pious followers, pious subjects, right? And this is also borne out with the particulars of the Delhi Sultanate when we look at the behavior of the various sultans. तो इस तरह से आपको लिखना पड़ेगा. Do you want me to dictate the answer या फिर खुद से attempt करोगे? कर लेंगे? Online students, how about you? Do you want me to dictate or will you attempt it on your own? We'll try attempting. All right. Good. So, one more debate out of the way. Next area that we need to focus upon is the historiography around the third urbanization. Right? So, जो फर्स्ट अर्बनाइजेशन है इंडियन हिस्ट्री का, कौन सा पीरियड? दी हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन. Second urbanization, which period? No, not Gupta, rather Mahajanpada to Gupta age. Mahajanpada से start से Gupta period तक. Following this, there was a period of de-urbanization. Urban decay or urban decline in North India during the late Gupta and post Gupta age. ठीक है? तो लेट गुप्ता और अर्ली मेडिवल पीरियड में अर्बन डीके और अर्बन डिक्लाइन. राइट? आर शर्मा का अगर हाइपोथेसिस याद है तो he talked about the decline of trade, the demonetization of the economy, the rise of feudalism, coupled with the localization of the economy, the emergence of villages as self-sufficient economic units, the picture of political fragmentation, and the decline of empires. ठीक है? So this was part of the Marxist framework to explain the political situation and economic situation during this period, late Gupta and post Gupta age, जिसको अर्ली medieval age भी बोला जाता है, right? Now, of course, later on there were some revisions of this framework. Later historians ने ये challenge किया, first of all जो time limit set करे गई हैं, for example, R.S. Sharma argued that the first phase of deurbanization began as early as 300 CE. Gupta period में ही शुरू हो गया था, but later the date was pushed back to 450 CE. Later even that was challenged, that the deurbanization, demonetization was complete. This was also challenged. New evidence was suggested, inscriptional evidence as well as textual evidence, archaeological evidence was given to suggest that urbanization was never complete. It may have declined, but it did not disappear. Trade and commerce continued to happen. In place of coins during long periods, some other commodities, some other mediums of exchange were being used. तो ये सारी चीजें सजेस्ट करी गई हैं. बट जो फर्दर डेवलपमेंट ऑफ दिस नैरेटिव हुआ है अर्बनाइजेशन का इंडिया में, दैट टुक प्लेस विद इन द मार्क्सिस्ट फ्रेमवर्क अर्ली ऑन, एंड देयरफॉर इन कीपिंग विद दिस फ्रेमवर्क द थर्ड अर्बनाइजेशन began with the establishment of Turkish rule in North India from the 13th century onwards. ठीक है, revisionist students क्या बोलते हैं? That urban revival had started as early as the 10th century AD itself. बट क्योंकि हम इस मार्क्सिस्ट फ्रेमवर्क के अंदर ही बात करनी है अभी, देयरफॉर द मार्क्सिस्ट हैव सजेस्टेड दिस डेट. ठीक है, नाउ लेट अस लुक एट व्हाट द डिफरेंट हिस्टोरियंस हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट व्हेन टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस थर्ड अर्बनाइजेशन. Now, a prominent early historian, A.M. Ashraf, he has not gone into the factors behind urbanization during this period. Rather, he has focused upon the cosmetic elements of the third urbanization and compared it to urbanization of the previous ages, right? क्या suggest किया है इन्होंने? He has talked about the changing skyline of Indian settlements, right? Before the establishment of Turkish rule, किसी भी cityscape का जो skyline था, that was dominated by which kinds of monuments? Temples, monasteries, ये सारी चीजें देखने के लिए मिलती थी skyline में. Now they are going to be dominated by new kinds of monuments such as mosques, madrasas, tombs, palaces, forts, etc. ठीक है, that is one thing to be noted. So write down, give the heading, historiography of the third urbanization. लिखो, according to Marxist scholars, comma, North India experienced a long phase of deurbanization or urban decay during the early medieval age. Full stop. This phase was characterized by declining trade, demonetization, political fragmentation, the fall of empires, political fragmentation, the fall of empires, a rise of feudalism, and the localization of the economy. Next point. According to them, the establishment of Turkish rule in North India gave a massive jolt in North India, gave a massive jolt to the economy. Jolt, झटका मिला, massive jolt to the economy, and revived it. ठीक है, full stop. Sub point. This led to the process of urban renewal, RENEWAL, and is generally referred to as India's third urbanization. Full stop. Next point. Next main point. The third urbanization has been an area of great historical interest. With many scholars examining the factors behind it and its character. Full stop. This has resulted in the emergence of a rich and vibrant historiography. Full stop. The most influential opinions are as follows. सब हेडिंग दे दो. नंबर 1 KM Ashraf, colon changing skyline. Write down. He does not focus upon the factors behind the third urbanization. Full stop. Rather, he has conducted a detailed survey of the cosmetic element of urbanization in India before and after the establishment of Turkish rule. Full stop. Next point. Next point. He notes that new structures and elements such as mosques, tombs, domes, arches, and minars had overshadowed the temples. Okay? Why do you think this was? First of all, the shifting of royal patronage. The earlier non-Islamic rulers used to patronize temple building primarily. Now, the patronage has gone to these Islamic structures, right? One is that thing. Second, the early Turkish conquest was followed by heavy persecution of non-Muslims. Many of the non-Islamic religious structures were deliberately destroyed, and in their place, Islamic monuments were constructed. Okay? These are the two factors. Write down. This may be attested to the following factors. सब पॉइंट में लिखो A and B. A, the transfer of royal patronage from temples to Islamic structures. And B, the deliberate destruction of non-Islamic places of worship by the early rulers and their conversion into mosques. Full stop. Next point. Next main point. This pattern was visible across the entire region of Turkish conquest, from Punjab to Bengal. Okay. For example, in Ajmer, a Buddhist monastery was destroyed and replaced by the Adhai Din Ka Jhopra mosque. In Delhi, a Jain temple, a Vaishnavite temple, which was earlier a Jain temple, was destroyed and replaced by the Quwwatul Islam mosque. The Nalanda and Vikramshila universities were also destroyed. Similarly, several religious structures were destroyed in Bengal, especially Lower Bengal. Several terracotta structures were destroyed, in whose place several mosques were constructed. ठीक है, तो एक तो ये चेंज नोटिस किया गया केम अशरफ. सेकेंड राइट, मोहम्मद हबीब. इनका क्या ओपिनियन है? That the third urbanization represented an urban revolution. And Marxist theory में revolution कौन लाता है? Which class? Revolution कौन लेके आता है? Marx. According to Marx, revolution से क्या बदलता है? सोशियो-पॉलिटिकल एंड इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन. राइट? क्यों? क्योंकि एलिट्स का ज्यादा जुल्म होता है, जो वर्किंग क्लास होता है उसकी बर्दाश्त के बाहर हो जाता है, एंड फाइनली एक रिएक्शन होता है. दैट ब्रिंग्स अबाउट अ रेवोल्यूशन. सो इन दिस रेवोल्यूशन, अर्बन रेवोल्यूशन, इफ मोहम्मद हबीब इज अ मार्क्सिस्ट हिस्टोरियन, who is going to be the hero? Protagonist कौन होगा? The working class, right? And उनके allies कौन होंगे? जो foreign invaders हैं. तो villains कौन हुए? जो local elites यहाँ पे पहले से exist करते थे. ठीक है? What have they said? That ऐसा नहीं है कि इंडिया में urban settlements पहले नहीं होते थे. But these urban settlements were not like the Turkish settlements. They were exclusive and closed. Fortified settlements, monopolized by the ruling class, composed of which social groups? The Rajputs and Brahmins. ठीक है? The economy was largely agrarian and the bulk of the population belonged to the Vaishya Shudra or untouchable community. So the peasantry constituted by the lower varnas, vaishyas, shudras and untouchables was living in a tragic condition. Right? What were the elements of this tragedy? They were subjected to feudal exploitation, in the form of excessively high burden of taxation, they were trapped in their condition because of the lack of social and physical mobility. And finally, they were also facing discrimination on the basis of caste and varna. And where were all of them living? Were they living inside these fortified, closed and exclusive settlements? No, these settlements were monopolized by the ruling class. They were living in the undefended countryside. ठीक है? ये पीरियड, ये पिक्चर कौन से पीरियड का है? राजपूत पीरियड का. ठीक है? जस्ट ऑन द ईव ऑफ द टर्किश इन्वेजन्स. नाउ विद द टर्किश इन्वेजन्स व्हाट हैपेंड? The Turkish invasions led in the suppression or led to the suppression of the Rajputs and Brahmin elites. Their forts were broken and the cities were thrown open. The forts were thrown open to the common population. The Turks did not discriminate upon varna or caste. They also suppressed the power of the rural elites, that is the feudal lords. And thus liberated the peasantry, which was now free to pursue a life that was completely rid of the earlier feudal controls. The Turks also generated a lot of employment opportunities in the cities. Thus, they provided physical and social mobility to the peasants. Many of these peasants voluntarily migrated to cities to take up various crafts. They became artisans and craftsmen. This burgeoning labor force resulted in the growth of crafts production. And this craft production in turn encouraged trade and commerce. Now, the success of trade and commerce requires some other things such as stability, better connectivity, internal peace, right? And all of this was provided by the Turks because they established political unity across North India. ठीक है? तो ये किसका कहना है? Muhammad Habib का. And this resulted in further suffering for the working class or in the emancipation of the working class. Emancipation of the working class. Thus, it has been characterized as a revolution, the urban revolution. Okay? So, give the second heading, Muhammad Habib, urban revolution. Write down. On the eve of Turkish invasion, India was a country of fortified cities and towns. Fortified cities and towns and unfortified villages. And unfortified villages. Full stop. The fortified settlements were monopolized by the ruling class, within brackets, right, Rajputs and Brahmins. While the condition of the working class was tragic. Working class was tragic. Full stop. In the same point, the economy was primarily agricultural. And characterized by a strong element of feudalism. Subpoint. The peasants who constituted the working class generally came from the lower layers of the society. Next point, they were subjected to a high degree of feudal exploitation in the form of high taxes, the absence of mobility, and discrimination on the basis of varna and caste. Discrimination on the basis of varna and caste. Next main point. According to Muhammad Habib, this changed with the Turkish conquest of North India. Full stop. Subpoint. The traditional elites were suppressed and the cities were thrown open to the workers. The cities were thrown open to the workers. And the cities were thrown open to the workers. Next subpoint. This led to the influx of a large number of former peasants within brackets both Hindu and Muslim to the cities which helped establish the new regime which helped establish the new regime. Okay? So a large number of lower caste Hindus and converted Muslims now started flowing into the cities and they became the greatest supporters of the new ruling class, the Turks. Okay? Why? Because they were the reason for their newfound freedoms, physical and social mobility. They were responsible for their emancipation. Write down. In this way, subpoint. Next subpoint. In this way, the working class was emancipated. Full stop. Next point. Next main point. This also facilitated urban growth by promoting crafts production and trade. craft production and trade. ठीक है, तो this is the explanation given by मोहम्मद हबीब. तो किस तरह के फैक्टर्स के ऊपर फोकस किया है? जनरली सोशल फैक्टर्स के ऊपर. He has called this an urban revolution which led to the emancipation of the working class. Next prominent historian who has talked about the third urbanization is Irfan Habib. Also a Marxist historian from Aligarh, and he is the son of Muhammad Habib. Okay? He has emphasized upon the importance of technological innovation in bringing about this new phase of urban renewal. ठीक है, ये हाँ ये भी चला. तो अभी इन्होंने सबसे पहले तो क्या करा कि रिजेक्टेड the idea of an urban revolution and emancipation of the working class. Right? तो मोहम्मद हबीब ने बोला था ना that the establishment of Turkish rule through the cities open for the suppressed peasantry, which created a new urban working class leading to the emancipation of the non-ruling population, non-elite population. इरफान हबीब ने क्या बोला? बुड्ढा पागल है, सब झूठ बोल रहा है. Right? There was no such urban revolution and no such emancipation of the working class. Yes, urbanization did take place, but what was the real reason behind it? The improvement of technology and the introduction of a lot of technological innovation by the Turks or during this period in various fields. Agriculture में भी, crafts production में भी. ठीक है, तो he gave the credit for urban renewal to technological innovation in various sectors, including crafts production, and agriculture. Right? Improvements in crafts production technology, इसकी वजह से होगा क्या? What is going to happen? The supply of manufactured goods is going to increase substantially. Manufacturing is going to become more efficient. The quality of goods being produced is also going to improve. And with improvements in agriculture, what is going to happen? More revenue is going to be generated, more income is going to be generated, the accumulation of wealth is going to increase, and disposable incomes are also going to rise. And this is going to generate the necessary demand for manufactured goods, and therefore improvements in technology indirectly contributed to the facilitation of trade during this period. ठीक है? And as a result, both of the ingredients for urban growth, that is improvements or increase in crafts production and trade and commerce, have been provided by these technological innovations. ठीक है? So this is what Irfan Habib has argued. Does this mean that there was any real change in the actual condition of the Indian peasantry? पेजेंट्री की कंडीशन में कोई मेजर चेंज आया? नहीं आया. क्यों? अकॉर्डिंग टू इरफान हबीब, दैट द टर्क्स at least initially remained confined to the cities. ठीक है? किसके? पेजेंट की कंडीशन में होंगे, लेकिन रेवोल्यूशनरी चेंजेस नहीं आने वाले हैं. ठीक है? The Turks themselves remained confined to the cities. They were more interested in revenue centralization than anything else. So as long as the revenue generated in the countryside was being canalized towards the center, are they going to interfere with the activities of the local elites in the villages? कोई इंटरफियर करेंगे या अकेले छोड़ देंगे? नहीं करने की जरूरत है, क्योंकि रेवेन्यू तो आ रहा है, राइट? एंड thus the local elites in the villages were left alone. So what the Turks had effectively done was to simply destroy the traditional urban elite. The local elites had been left intact. And what was the first point of contact between the elites, between the upper caste and lower caste? Was it happening in the cities during the Rajput period or in the villages? Villages में हो रहा था, क्योंकि cities में तो थे ही नहीं वो, right? And the greatest amount of exploitation on the lower sections of the society was being done by these elements, the local elites. So the greatest source of exploitation was left intact, and thus they continued exploiting the local peasantry. ठीक है? In fact, even conversion of the local peasantry, lower peasantry to Islam was no guarantee of emancipation. New converts to Islam, especially from the lower castes, were treated with क्या? Honor or derision by the elite Turkish nobility and the ulema. किस तरह से ट्रीट करते थे? उनको एम्ब्रेस करते थे या फिर उनके अगेंस्ट भी डिस्क्रिमिनेट करते थे? उनके अगेंस्ट भी डिस्क्रिमिनेशन चालू रहा, वर ट्रीटेड विद derision by the urban Turkish elite. So while these new converts were able to escape the villages and the intense exploitation that they were facing, they expected complete physical as well as social mobility once they moved to the cities with the new religious identity. They were able to get their desired physical mobility, but they never got their desired social mobility. सोशल लेयर में इनका रैंक अभी भी बहुत नीचे रह गया. They were not able to climb up. And जो नॉन कॉन्वर्ट्स हैं, those peasants who have simply migrated to the cities without embracing Islam, उनके अगेंस्ट डिस्क्रिमिनेशन और भी ज्यादा था. राइट? Hindu artisans were subjected to intense discrimination. And even persecution at the hands of the urban Turkish elites. Clear? So, ऐसे में would it be correct to say that the working class had been emancipated? Emancipation हुआ था reality में? नहीं हुआ था. So, Irfan Habib rejected the idea of an urban revolution or emancipation of the working class. At the same time, he did say that urban growth took place, and उसके लिए इसने कौन सा फैक्टर आइडेंटिफाई किया है? टेक्नोलॉजिकल इनोवेशन. It encouraged both craft production, thus increasing the supply of manufactured goods, and agriculture, thus raising the demand for manufactured goods, thus facilitating trade, by which all the ingredients for urban renewal were in place, including rising craft production and trade. Clear? तो ये बोलते हैं इरफान हबीब. लिख लो इरफान हबीब नंबर 3 कोलन टेक्नोलॉजिकल इनोवेशन. Write down. Irfan Habib rejected the idea of an urban revolution characterized by the emancipation of the working class. A revolution characterized by the emancipation of the working class. Subpoint. He points out that the Turkish invaders simply destroyed the traditional urban elite. That the Turkish invaders simply destroyed the traditional urban elite. Without bringing any major change in the countryside. Without bringing any major change in the countryside. Subpoint. Their first priority with respect to the villages or with respect to the countryside was revenue centralization. Was revenue centralization. Full stop. As long as this was achieved, इसी में, as long as this was achieved, comma, the local elites, within brackets you can write rural nobility, was left alone. Next point. The exploitation of the peasantry continued. The exploitation of the peasantry continued unabated. 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 बिना किसी रिलैक्सेशन. ठीक है? Unabated. Since the local elites were their greatest source of exploitation. Were their greatest source of exploitation. तो जो peasants थे उनको कोई रिलीफ नहीं मिला. क्लियर? नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट. Even those who migrated to the cities faced challenges. Next point. Hindu artisans were subjected to intense discrimination. Were subjected to intense discrimination and persecution. And persecution by the new urban Turkish elite. Next point. Similarly, new converts to Islam, within brackets, especially lower castes, were not treated equally. Were not treated equally. So stop. In other words, the third urbanization hardly brought about any revolutionary change in the condition of the working class. Any change, any revolutionary change in the condition of the working class. ठीक है? तो एक ये हमने आइडिया कवर कर लिया है that it was not a revolution at all. Clear? Next main point लिखो. At the same time, Irfan Habib argues that there was a distinct expansion. In the urban economy. In the urban economy. leading to a spurt, SPURT, spurt मतलब sudden growth, ठीक है, leading to a spurt in the number and size of cities. Full stop. For this, comma, Irfan Habib has emphasized that technological innovation played the most significant role. Okay? Sub point. The introduction of better equipment, practices and techniques in agriculture such as irrigation में क्या मेजर कंट्रीब्यूशन था टर्क्स का, क्या इंट्रोड्यूस किया इन्होंने, पर्शियन व्हील, राइट, such as the Persian wheel resulted in the growth and expansion of agriculture. Full stop. Disposable incomes increased, comma, disposable incomes increased, comma हटा दो, along with revenue collection and wealth accumulation. Full stop. This pushed the demand for manufactured goods. ठीक है, next sub point. Similarly, the introduction of superior textile, paper manufacturing, and construction technology led to a rapid increase in crafts production. Full stop. Next sub point. Therefore, the factors of demand and supply aligned to encourage trade. Subpoint. With this, with this, trade and manufacturing emerged as the engines of urban growth. Emerged as the engines of urban growth. ठीक है, ये किसका ओपिनियन है? इरफान हबीब का. नेक्स्ट ओपिनियन नंबर 4, हामिदा खातून नकवी. What has she said? What was the biggest factor for third urbanization under the Turks? According to her, the state played the leading role in the process of urbanization. So it was state-led urbanization. Right? So, how did the state lead the process of urbanization? Not only did the sultans establish a large empire, but they also set up a number of administrative centers in various locations, in various parts of the empire, right? Therefore, urbanization was encouraged because of the emergence of prominent cities as political centers. Okay? So, cities as political centers emerged first of all. Example: Delhi, Lahore, Sialkot, Multan, Jaunpur, Burhanpur, Manikpur, Agra, etc. ये सब के सब prominent political centers थे under the Sultanate. Then the state also provided the necessary conditions and infrastructure for the growth of cities. क्या किया इन्होंने? Political unity and stability, which gave the opportunity for the expansion of agriculture and the growth of craft production and commerce. Okay, it was a necessary precondition for urbanization. Secondly, the state also provided the essential outlay or essential infrastructure needed for supporting urbanization, needed for facilitating urbanization, such as the construction of highways maintained by the state, the construction of sarais along important trade routes, the protection of safety to the travelers, right? Further, in the cities, the establishment of markets where free exchange could be undertaken, right? And in order to prove that urbanization under the Sultanate was a state-led process, a process that was dependent upon the state, H.K. नकवी ने और क्या पॉइंट आउट किया है? That as the state became weaker, what is going to happen to urbanization? Is that going to increase or decline? It is going to decline. And here she has taken the case of Ahmedabad, Gujarat. Now, at the height of its power, Ahmedabad was very prominent as a trading center. It had roughly 360 neighborhoods or blocks known as puras. Right? However, beginning from the 16th century, Gujarat was blockaded by the Portuguese. Portuguese आ गए यहाँ पर, and the city of Ahmedabad began losing its prominence as a trading center. Right? So the state was becoming weaker. It was not able to sustain the economic growth. Number of puras reduced to 175. And finally, during the Mughal period, other regions became more important, right? So Gujarat came under even greater pressure from the Mughals. We are talking about the mid 16th century. So 1560s, 1570s की बात कर रहे हैं. And the number of puras came down to 80. As long as the Sultanate was strong, Ahmedabad continued to flourish as a prominent urban center. But with the declining fortunes of the Sultanate, it also continued to decline. लेकिन ये जो पूरा फ्रेमवर्क दिया है और जस्टिफिकेशन दिया है, does it appear to be valid? या इसमें कुछ limitations है? बिगेस्ट वीकनेस क्या मिलता है हमको? एक दूसरा एग्जाम्पल ले सकते हैं हम, दिल्ली सल्तनत अंदर फिरोज शाह तुगलक. Would you characterize the state of Firoz Shah Tughlaq as a strong state, a stable state? Politically speaking, stable and strong था? नहीं था. So it was weak and unstable state. ठीक है? However, in contrast to Hamida Khatun Naqvi's framework, Firoz Shah Tughlaq's period witnessed the period of greatest urban growth, right? So, with the Sultan himself laying the foundations of 5 large cities. तो हम क्या बोल सकते हैं इन दी एंड? Was urbanization under the Delhi Sultanate completely a state-led and state-determined process? नहीं. So state did play a role in facilitating urbanization, but its role was not deterministic. ठीक है? There were other factors at play also. Write down. According to H.K. Naqvi, comma, the state played the leading role in facilitating urbanization. Next point. She points out that many Sultanate cities were political centers. You can take down a few examples. Example: Delhi, Lahore, Multan, Sialkot, Jaunpur, Burhanpur, etc. Next main point. Further, state action was crucial for urban growth. Subpoint: the state provided the necessary political stability and peace required for the growth of trade, agriculture, and crafts production. Subpoint: further, the state itself emerged as a large consumer of manufactured goods. And directly patronized craftsmen and traders. Next, main point. The state also facilitated urbanization by providing the essential infrastructure in the form of roads, sarais, marketplaces, and security for traders. Next main point. By citing the example of Ahmedabad, comma, H.K. Naqvi has tried to establish a correlation between urbanization and political stability. ठीक है? Next point. Next sub point. And क्या लिखा है आपने? Between urbanization and political stability. She points out that according to the Haft Ilkim, there were 360 puras in Ahmedabad in the early 15th century. Full stop. Next point. By the early 16th century, next point. By the early 16th century, they had reduced to 175 due to the Portuguese blockade of Gujarat. The Portuguese blockade of Gujarat. The Portuguese blockade of Gujarat. By the next point, by the mid 16th century, this number had further reduced. To 80. As mentioned in the Aine Akbari. Full stop. Same subpoint. Aine Akbari. This was a result of same point. This was a result of constant Mughal pressure. Okay. Write down. Next point. However, next main point. However, Professor Naqvi's framework suffers from some limitations. Number 1. It seems that she has overestimated the role played by the state while ignoring other factors. Full stop. Number 2. The correlation between urbanization and political stability stands on flimsy grounds. Subpoint. Satish Chandra has argued that if political stability was the most prominent factor, comma, Firoz Shah Tughlaq's reign could not possibly have produced the strongest growth of the urban economy, including the establishment of new cities, ठीक है? So this is H.K. Naqvi's idea. क्या बोला है? That it was state-led and state-sponsored urbanization. Number 5, Satish Chandra. Now, one of the things that he has done is to reject the idea of state-led urbanization by pointing out that the weak reign of Firoz Shah Tughlaq produced as many as 5 large cities. Thus, there is no correlation between political stability and urbanization, and therefore he turned towards other factors, primarily agricultural growth, as the single biggest factor for facilitating urbanization. तो यहाँ पे आइडिया क्या है? That Firoz Shah Tughlaq's reign was characterized by political instability and disintegration of the empire politically. At the same time, it was characterized by agricultural expansion. ठीक है? Now, while political instability and disintegration posed a danger to the project of urbanization, these dangers were never able to materialize. Why? Because in spite of instability and disintegration, Firoz Shah Tughlaq was able to provide an environment of peace. ठीक है? Thus giving an opportunity for agriculture to expand and for trade and commerce to survive. Agricultural expansion, on the other hand, resulted in the generation of new wealth, it resulted in the increase of disposable incomes, and in the stabilization of revenue, right? And was due to these factors that urbanization became possible. ठीक है? So while these factors could have worked against urbanization, they were neutralized because Firoz Shah Tughlaq was able to pursue a policy of peace because of his policy of appeasement. At the same time, he was able to undertake agricultural expansion at a large scale, generating large amounts of new wealth, increasing incomes, creating demand, and giving the state sufficient revenues to kickstart and facilitate the process of urbanization. And that is why, according to Satish Chandra, agricultural growth was the biggest factor in urbanization. Clear? Write down. Satish Chandra argues that the expansion of agriculture was the most crucial factor in facilitating urbanization. Full stop. This is attested to by the developments during the reign of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Subpoint. On the one hand, political instability and disintegration threatened urbanization. Next subpoint. On the other hand, large scale expansion of agriculture led to the generation of wealth, raised disposable incomes, and stabilized revenue. Allowing the state to facilitate urbanization and the economy to sustain it. To facilitate urbanization and the economy to sustain it. बट यहां पे भी लिमिटेशन क्या है, प्रॉब्लम क्या है? जैसे एच.के. नकवी ने इंपॉर्टेंस ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर को इग्नोर किया था, वैसे ही सतीश चंद्रा इंपॉर्टेंस ऑफ पॉलिटिकल फैक्टर्स को इग्नोर कर रहे हैं. ठीक है. नाउ एग्रीकल्चर मे वेल हैव बीन द बेसिस ऑफ इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ, इट मे हैव बीन द इंजन फॉर ग्रोथ, लेकिन ब्रेक कहां पे था ग्रोथ का? पॉलिटिकल इंस्टेबिलिटी. And had Firoz Shah Tughlaq not been able to neutralize this hurdle, neutralize this challenge, then would urbanization have actually taken place? नहीं हो पाता. ठीक है? Write down. Next main point. However, it must be remembered that the maintenance of internal stability was equally important for facilitating agriculture. For facilitating agriculture. Sorry, for facilitating urbanization. For facilitating urbanization. If agricultural expansion represented the engine for urban growth, political instability represented the brakes. Instability represented the brakes. BRAKES. तो गाड़ी में इंजन भी होता है, ब्रेक भी होता है ना. तो इंजन है और ब्रेक नहीं है, या फिर ब्रेक लगा हुआ है तो इंजन काम करेगा? नहीं करेगा. राइट डाउन. हाँ, सेम सब पॉइंट में कंटिन्यू करो. बोथ need to be managed carefully for facilitating urbanization. ठीक है. तो ये हो गए व्यूज ऑफ सतीश चंद्रा. नेक्स्ट, the views of some revisionist historians, Andre Wink and Sunil Kumar. तो अभी तक जितने भी historians हैं, what have they focused upon? They have focused upon one or the other activity or contribution of the ruling elite at the center. So the introduction of new technology, the introduction of new technology leading to the expansion of agriculture, the state-led urbanization, etc. Revisionist historians ने हिस्ट्री को रिवाइज करने का सोचा. They started thinking about factors which till now have been overlooked. और इनको क्या दिखाई पड़ा? Activities which were going around in the peripheries, right? तो पेरिफेरी में टर्किश पावर का मोस्ट इंड्योरिंग सिंबल क्या था? प्रोविंसेस में हाउ वाज टर्किश पावर प्रोजेक्टेड? थ्रू द इंस्टीट्यूशन ऑफ इक्ताज. ठीक है. तो इक्ता और garrison towns were said to have played the greatest role in facilitating urbanization under the Sultanate by Andre Wink and Sunil Kumar. So what were the iktas? क्या थे ये? They were land revenue assignments given to important officials and commanders in lieu of a cash salary. So did they simply serve a wage function, or was the ICTA also an administrative institution? It was also an administrative institution. At the same time, it was the substitute for provincial administration. The iqtadar functioned as the provincial governor and was responsible for general administration, revenue administration, and military defense. General administration would involve the maintenance of law and order and the administration of justice. Revenue administration would involve the collection and remission of revenue to the center, and military defense would involve the raising and maintenance of a military force of animals, equipment, of constructing fortifications, etc. Right? Now, these iqtadars would require an administrative center out of which they would operate. So, in the middle of every iqta, or in the most prominent place of every iqta, was an administrative center known as khitta. Okay? It served not only as the administrative center of the iqta, it also served as the garrison town, because most of these soldiers would be stationed in this headquarter, in this provincial headquarter, in order to defend it. Okay? Sure. And the khitta, because of this large gathering of population where a lot of wealth was concentrated, also emerged as a prominent consumer of manufactured goods and agricultural प्रोडक्ट्स. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पे जो ऑफिशियल्स हैं, सोल्जर्स हैं, दे वुड रिक्वायर अ लार्ज नंबर ऑफ मैन्युफैक्चर्ड गुड्स फॉर देयर ओन यूज, फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ गिफ्टिंग, नजराना वगैरह देने के लिए, फॉर फीडिंग देमसेल्व्स, फॉर फीडिंग द एनिमल्स एटसेट्रा. ठीक है, एंड thus the khitta eventually emerged as a prominent marketplace where both local as well as imported goods would be traded in large quantities. ठीक है, now with the intersection of these traders कई सारी इकोनॉमिक अपॉर्चुनिटीज भी इमर्ज हुई एंड some of the khittas emerged or began specializing in particular commodities. For example, जौनपुर में कुछ बनेगा, फिरोजाबाद में फॉर एग्जाम्पल ग्लासवेयर became very prominent, अलीगढ़ में मेटलवेयर, लॉक्स वगैरह बड़े प्रोमिनेंट बन गए, राइट? तो as a result of the, you can say, improving transportation and communication between the different khittas, regional specialization in craft production also started taking place. So these khittas began emerging not only as prominent administrative and military centers, but also as prominent trading centers and production centers. Many of them later went on to become large cities. ठीक है? ये किसने बोला है? आंद्रे विंक एंड सुनील कुमार. Right? Write down. According to them, the ICTA played a prominent role in urbanization. Full stop. They were not simply land revenue assignments. But served as a substitute for provincial administration. Full stop. The next point, the Iqtadar functioned as the provincial governor and was responsible for general administration, revenue administration, and defense. Next point. To fulfill these responsibilities, administrative and military centers known as khittas emerged. Full stop. Subpoint. They also emerged as prominent consumers of manufactured goods and agricultural products. Thus facilitating both regional and local trade. Next subpoint. Some of these khittas became specialized centers of manufacturing, especially with the improvement of connectivity and economic integration of India. ठीक है. Now, the Khittas also facilitated the growth of trade, commerce and production by through political methods. कैसे? Khittas became the main centers for stabilizing a particular region, right? तो मिलिट्री को यूज करके उसको पैसिफाई करना, वहां पे सिक्योरिटी प्रोवाइड करना, एग्रीकल्चरल एक्सपेंशन अंडरटेक करना है, सो इट वाज इनिशिएटेड बाय द खित्ताज ओनली. मिलिट्री एक्सपेंशन करना है तो इट वाज इनिशिएटेड बाय द खित्ताज ओनली. राइट डाउन. Next point. Further, the Khittas also facilitated urbanization by providing security, facilitating the expansion of agriculture and regulating the markets and currency. ठीक है. Full stop. So, according to Andre Vink and Sunil Kumar, the Iktas also played a prominent role. So, could you identify any one of these factors as being the most prominent and the only factor that was responsible for urbanization in the Sultanate period? किसी एक को बोल सकते हैं that this was the only factor that was responsible? नहीं. So, it was a combination of all these factors that was responsible. ठीक है. कंक्लूडिंग रिमार्क्स जो है कल की क्लास में हम देखते हैं. आई एम एंडिंग द क्लास फॉर टुडे. नाउ इफ देयर आर एनी डाउट्स प्लीज लेट मी नो गाइज.